Another fine episode, and we are going to be talking about a lot of things food related today, especially Mexican food related. And I know Rich has been looking forward to this for weeks, actually, the last couple weeks when I brought this idea up. Um, so we've done a little bit of research and just to kind of explain little bit about the background. So some of you might be familiar with South Park. Rich, have you ever seen South Park?
Oh yeah, definitely have.
So it's taking us back to our semi youth because I think South Park came out in the early 2000s or late 90s, something like that.
Yep.
But Trey Parker, Matt Stone, who created South Park and have grown that into a major media operation. Um, their home is Denver, Colorado, and there's a restaurant in Denver, Colorado, which I know you haven't been to it, Rich, but I have. And the place is called
Wow,
Casa
cool.
Bonita. It is a Mexican restaurant, but way different than any Mexican restaurant you've ever been to. I like to call it a mini Disneyland because there's so much going on there. There are arcades, indoor cliff diving. If you want to go see a show, you can go see people do indoor cliff diving there. Um, they at one point had like a old time photo booth where you could dress up in the old clothes like you do in some of these tourist towns and get your picture taken. I believe around Halloween they have a haunted house. The place is huge, and you wouldn't know it because it's in a strip mall. But they have this huge facade out front, pink, and I'll show you a picture of it in a minute. But yeah, this place is pretty wild. I have a cousin that actually loves it there. We went there for his wedding rehearsal dinner, actually. So way back a long time ago, we went to Casa Bonita and pretty much just enjoyed the after or evening there, I guess you could say. Um, but here's the deal, Rich, and this is why I thought it would be good for us to talk about it. They fell on hard times over the pandemic. Casa
Yep.
Bonita has been up and down. They're well known for their sopapillas. The food, however, kind of sketchy at times. Sometimes good, sometimes not. But what ended up happening is they filed for bankruptcy. They couldn't make it through the pandemic, and this is where Trey Parker, Matt Stone come in. So I don't know. Did you have a chance to watch the South Park episode featuring Casa Bonita?
I don't
Did I put
remember
that
it,
on
but
your assignment list?
yeah, I think there was a link in there. I did not rewatch it. I'm
Yeah, there
fairly
might have
certain
been.
I
There
saw
might
it.
have been.
I
But
saw it in the
anyway,
past. So
Cartman was going to Casa Bonita. I can't remember the full plot twist on it, but
yep.
basically he was that was kind of like his playground. And anyway, so these guys have known about Casa Bonita for a long time. They've obviously produced shows about it. And for whatever reason, they decided to get in the restaurant business. Now they didn't call me first because I probably would have talked them out of it. But they did. They bought it out of bankruptcy and they saved it and they've refurbished it. Here's the fun part, Rich. This is the part you'll love because you're the money guy here. They spent $40 million refurbishing this restaurant. They did tear it down and rebuild it. They even said in one interview that it would have been cheaper to do that than it would be to do what they did. But they pumped 40 million into it. And they've done some other stuff too. So they're trying to be very good employers. And let me give you an example here. I'm gonna turn on our sharing. I want to show you this article. So Casa Bonita improving skills despite closed restaurants. So they were closed since what 2020, 2021, I think. So it's been at least a couple years, right? You would think
Yep.
people would probably need to move on and make money. Well, no. Trey and Matt paid people for 35 hours a week to to keep the team together while they were closed and while they were remodeling. What they said is go out in the community, do public works type stuff for volunteer works, and that's kind of how they're giving back. So they invested quite a bit of money in their staff to keep them together and to also keep them trained up. As you can see in this article here, I'm not going to read all the details on the article, but pretty much their employees got free 26-week language class, for example. That's pretty impressive. You're getting paid to learn a new language, probably Spanish, because I do believe they have a number of Spanish employees. I know their executive chef here is also a Spanish background as well, or Mexican background. So they did a lot of things to keep their employees here, keep their employees happy. Now, fast forward. Casa Bonita reopening is real, but it might as well be a joke. And where this comes in at, and this is why I think it's important for us to talk about, because I know you deal with staffing, I deal with staffing, we deal with the costs of staffing, we deal with culture of staffing. And what ended up happening is they were going to reopen here in May. That was kind of the designated date that they had given everybody. And lo and behold, they go to reopen and wait. Their employees come in and say, well, we have some demands to make. We want better working conditions. We want better pay. Now, I don't know what you think about that. Personally, I'm looking at all the stuff they did for the employees and going, well, what's the story here? Why do they want this? Um, Now, one of the articles I checked out, let me pull it up here, is they were going to do a flat fee or a flat hourly rate. Now, in the past, I guess Casa Bonita had allowed people to collect tips. Well, Trey and Matt decided that they wanted to give a living wage, and we've heard about this a lot, right, Rich? So they've talked about, you know,
Yeah.
$15 minimum wage, and people should have a living wage, and they've even talked about as much as $30, $40 an hour is what people should be making. Well, look at this. Trey and Matt decide they're going to pay people $30 an hour, but they're not going to require tipping or not going to allow tipping in the restaurant. They threw a fit. They didn't want it. They wanted the tipping instead. They thought they would make more money doing that. So that was part of the demands that they were making, was to really, free up their so they can tip. Now, I am sure they would want
Yeah.
$30 an hour plus tips, but we'll see what comes of that. So as you've read through some of
Yeah.
these articles, because I've sent all these articles to you, what's your
Yep.
thoughts from a financial side on this? I mean, first of all, it's kind of crazy to do $40 million. If you're the CFO there, what are you going to be looking at or trying to figure out how they're going to make money doing this?
Well, I think my hair would have been, if I had any left, it would have burned off because I would have been on fire saying, why are you putting $40 million of renovations into this building? Some of the articles did say it was really well done, and it's to what they would expect from someone like Trey and Matt. So I'm kind of looking at it, still saying it's just way too much. And then the further articles, kind of turned around, where I think I read one that said they took 27 different tries to get the right color pink because they wanted to get it back to the original color. So I think as the CFO, I would be jumping up and down and saying, come on, guys, like, you might notice it's off a shade, but is everybody else going to notice it's off a shade? Do we have to do it 27 times? But I think that, $40 million is an awful lot of money, especially when it's a commercial building. And you
And
only
one you don't
recoup
own.
those, and one you don't own. So it's a leasehold improvement on a commercial building, which is going to be 39-year recovery. So, I hope I'm still here to see it end, but that's a long time, right?
That's a
That's a
long
long
runway,
time to
definitely.
get that back. So it was a little shocking to me to see the 40 million number.
Now,
But yeah, you're not going to get that. Yeah, and you're not going to get that back for that long. So, you know, I hope they have a bigger plan and a better plan than the only publicity that's going on here right now, which is some really,
well, I will
which
say
I would
this.
say is somewhat terrible.
Yeah, I will
Huh?
say this, that in a lot of ways, I think this is more of a labor of love and maybe a bit
Yeah.
of a vanity project over actually figuring out how this thing's going to monetize itself. At the same time, I
Yeah.
can't believe that that these guys are going to want to operate this thing at a continual loss for, as you pointed out, 39 years. So if you were coming into this from the financial side, I guess that's what I want to hear, what you would do to really kind of try and at least get this thing to, from a monetary perspective, to look better on the books.
Yeah, I think that. It goes back to some of the things we said in earlier podcasts. I think it goes back to people trying to make something into much more of an experience. And it sounds like, Casa Bonita was actually an experience since I think like 1974 is when they originally opened. So they've been doing this experience type of thing for a long time. And I think if, one thing I can't say is why these guys did it. I'd have to assume that you're right? That it's a kind of labor of love. It's related to the South Park, episode and activity that named the restaurant, made it a national name. So I have to assume that's why they did it. And as far as trying to be some degree of recouping that investment, I think the only other way, other than writing off the cost over that long period of time, is boost the experience, improve the food, do the things like you said that were causing it to not necessarily be the greatest place, and then hopefully that gives you the return.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a labor of love, like you said, maybe they're not as worried. Maybe it's a break-even project. I mean, I saw somebody in one article said, "Well, maybe it's a tax write-off," and I said, "No."
That's a
I
big
said,
tax write-off.
You don't throw away $1 million so that you get a $300,000 tax write-off. It doesn't work that way.
Yep.
I wouldn't, if you could get a tax write-off without laying out the $1 million, that's where it might be a tax play. But I don't see the explanation in the article just wasn't enough. So, but I think again, we go back to that conversation about the experiential, malls trying to be experiential, restaurants trying to be experiential, get people into the door and want to come back because of the experience, not necessarily because they had nachos.
Well, I think you also have to monetize the experience. Like I said, this place
Yeah.
is huge. There's a lot of different things going on. You have to find ways to, beyond the food, in my opinion, to get other people to foot money for all these extra services that they need to provide. Um,
Mhm.
the other side of this, which is kind of the premise of our podcast today, is they've done a lot for their employees. At least from the articles I've read, they've done everything in their power that they could to make the employees happy, create a great culture, set them up for success, protect their jobs. And now the employees are coming back and asking for more. And from a financial side, I'm just curious, what else do you do when you've provided training, you've paid wages when there was no income coming in to keep them there, keep them happy, and now they're coming back and wanting even more than that? Are there things from a financial side that you're looking at going, okay, we need to change something here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I can kind of throw out to that. Number one, they changed the way that this restaurant, um, because of it being an experience, there's a door charge.
Mm.
So essentially, that includes the food. So it's a flat fee for adult and a flat fee for children, I believe, is what I read. So you somewhat have to run all these experiences, and you're doing it on a $35 adult charge and a $25 kid charge. So I'd have to see the numbers, but my immediate curiosity is, can you stay afloat if that has to cover every expense to run the experience as well as the food? Because I think you probably tell me that food cost alone is probably 40% of usually of what you figured your cost would your overall bill would be, or your ticket
Actually,
bill, right?
so from my experience, and I do have a number of years in the restaurant, I actually did manage a small chain.
Yeah.
Typically, what you're looking at is you're trying to get your employee wages to about 20 to 25% of your total output. Food costs, that can really vary depending upon the concept of the restaurant. For us, in the type of restaurant I was in, our food costs, we were trying to keep it between 20 and 25%. Um,
Okay.
when you're dealing with Mexican, and obviously they've changed the menu, they've upgraded the menu, from my understanding, quite a bit. You're going to change the quality of ingredients. That's going to increase the costs, type of ingredients, type of menu items. But at the same point, if you go to a Mexican restaurant, any Mexican restaurant, typically it's some of the cheaper food you can get. You can buy a burrito for $10 to $15, and it's a big, big burrito. What are they using
Right.
it? They're using lettuce, tomato, refried beans, rice, and some form of meat. The meat's your highest food
Yep.
cost item in there. The rest of it's fairly
Yep.
cheap. So, depending upon, again, quality, quantity, all that kind of stuff, you could really get your food costs in some cases down to 15%,
Mhm.
without cheating the customer. So you're looking at 25% on labor. You're looking at another, we'll say 15%, which gets you up to what, 40 total, if I'm doing the
Yep.
math right.
Sounds right.
So if that's the case, you still have 60% to play with. Now, as you pointed
Yeah.
out, $40 million on leasehold improvements, assuming there was a loan on that. I don't think these guys had to float a loan. I believe they just sold a deal to Paramount for South Park that was like in the hundreds of millions. So, maybe in some ways this was a way to shelter cash. I don't know, but
Yeah. I don't
you
know.
know, it's it's still, like you said, spending 1 million to get 300 back doesn't really seem to make sense. But um, it's there's a lot of overhead that you can't really, you can play with food costs, you can play with employee wages. You really can't take away that 40 million in however that was invested without, that's going to be a consistent day to day, week to week, month to month type bill. Then you've got
Right.
your electricity, you have your water. Like I said, there's indoor diving, so you've got a lot of electricity being burned on heating a pool, and you got a lot of water being burned on keeping that pool full and keeping the waterfall going.
Yep.
Plus the arcades, plus everything else. I mean, in my opinion, your overhead's the biggest chunk that you got to try and figure out. Now,
Right.
one thing that isn't built into that daily or that individual cost is bar bill, because they have full bars there. I think they put in 3 different bars. So drinks, obviously there's a lot of margin in drinks, and there tends to be a lot of margin in desserts. I don't know if they offer desserts as an additional cost. I know they're famous for their sopapillas, so maybe that's it. But maybe there's other things that they bill on top of that. Like I said, there's the arcade. There's, if they still do the old time photo booth, there's other ways to pull money in. But you're kind of struggling here because there's two different routes you're looking at. So from
Yeah.
a restaurant side of things, table turn is very important. You want people in and out in a relatively quick period of time. You typically don't want them lagging around for hours and hours on end tying up that table, because that prevents you from bringing in other guests who also you need to collect money. So back to that overhead thing.
Right.
Um, but then on the other
Yeah.
side,
And on
again,
top of that,
yeah, go ahead. Go
no,
ahead.
and on top of that, we'll get to it, I'm sure, but their schedule right now is
Ring.
is reservation only.
Yep.
You have
Yeah.
to you have to reserve the table. So now you've got a very strict schedule for who and how long that person can be at that table, because
Yeah.
that table's got to be opened up for the next reservation to be able to come in. So I think it's almost that they're trying a new concept, and I would have to imagine their financial staff are going through new, iterations of their plan over
Sure.
and over again, because I think we'll get to that a little bit as we go through the things that we're talking about. But I think that's a factor.
Yeah. I do think that the situation with the reservations, I know they're doing reservations for soft open. I believe once
Mhm.
they think they've got their service dialed in and the food dialed in right, and they're confident that they can deliver on quality product, I think then it's going to be opened as normal, and you'll be able to just walk in, sit down, or at least you can take walk-in reservations then as well. Um, but yeah, that is going to be a, a, a big issue. Is really how do you keep people in here but not keep people in their seat where they're eating? And to me,
Right.
that's so, as I'm looking at from an operational side, that's kind of what I'm looking at. You got to keep the employees happy. I believe they're doing
Yep.
everything they can to pay fair and to provide a good work environment. But you got to keep those tables turning, and you got to find ways to get them in there, sit them down, let them eat, and then if they want to linger around, how do you remove them from that table and still keep them active doing other things before they walk out the door? Because I would be selling them margaritas. I would be doing the photos. I really would kind of look at this like a cruise ship. And have you ever been on a cruise ship before, Rich?
No,
There's your
no.
one-time fee to get on, which covers your room and covers, most of the food and a few drinks like water, coffee, tea, that type of thing. But everything else is an add-on. You want a beverage package? Well, that's an extra charge. If you want to do shore excursions, that's an extra charge. If you want to do some entertainment, sometimes that's an extra charge. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's not. And they kind of have to take the same approach here where they're going to have to look at the entire operation and say, well, where can we monetize and keep people moving around? Because they could do it a couple different ways. They could stage it. So, for example, they're taking reservations right now, and let's say your table's not ready. Well, if you come a little bit early, maybe you can go around and do some of the activities until your table's ready. Then, once your table's freed up, you get to sit down and eat. And then, as you're wrapping up, there's something to kind of direct you to go do something else. And whether or not that's, watching the show from a different vantage point, or, uh, you know, walking through a haunted house or a fun house or getting pictures taken or whatever it might be. It seems like that's kind of how you got to work things to kind of keep that flow going. Um, and to me, that's probably going to be the biggest issue for them to monetize this thing and actually recoup some of their investment in it. But then there's the other side here. There's the employees again. And if the employees are demanding more money, is that really what they should be doing right now? Is that in their best interests? And from my side, I'm looking at going, they've made this huge investment in them. They made the investment in you, the employee, and now you're saying that's not enough. And when's it going to stop?
Yeah, I think to a certain, this is where I was a little bit torn. Like I could almost understand the employees kind of pushback a little bit. But I'm really leaning more towards the employers doing everything that they can and doing everything to try to be as innovative, because we all know how restaurants can work. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it could be very quickly that this just goes down the tubes and then all these people don't have jobs anyway. So you partly want to look at the employer and say, look, you have to do whatever you can to keep them as happy as you can, but there's a limit. And unfortunately, I think the one piece that I'm not 100% sure on is there a populace around there that, if they want to really put it to it and say, nope, we're just not going to do it, this is what we have to do, will other people be there to fill those slots? Because they're in this slow opening, trying to get to the point of a full opening where they're going almost 90 to 100%. No, it's more than that. It's they're only seating, I think, right now like 2,600 people a week, and they're trying to get to 20,000 a week.
Yeah,
So they've got like 100 or so employees that they're trying to take to 350 employees.
right.
So if they're already fighting with the first 100, is there, they can't go all out and say, well, we'll take care of this 100. They'll never get to the 350 because they won't have the money to
Exactly.
pay full employment. So they're running down this kind of balance in the middle of how do we do this? And I think the only misstep where I could say I would side with the employees is, I think, again, going back to another podcast that we had, it comes down to communication. And did they tell the employees what the employees are saying they did, which was, well, you'll make $40 to $50 an hour once you calculate the tips in.
Mm-hmm.
And now you give them $30 an hour flat. Well, they were all expecting 40 to 50. That's what
Yep.
they heard.
Yep.
So the $30 an hour, even though you've given them money now on a soft opening when you're only serving 2,600 people, okay,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't hear that. They're still waiting for the 40 to 50 and full time.
Right.
So there's a delicate balance here, and I think their only fault on their side, from my perspective, is that the communication sounds like it might have been off. There
I
might have been
I
an
agree
error
with
in
you
there
there. Yeah,
somewhere.
I think they really, if there's anywhere they missed, it's two things. It's the communication, and I also believe there's this strong push by a lot of people to try and make everybody happy. And I tell the people I work with, if you're going to spend all your time trying to make everybody happy, the only result you get is nobody will be happy. And that's
Yeah.
kind of, in a way, what we're seeing here is that it seems like,
Mhm.
as they're doing things to try and make the customers happy. So you don't have to tip. It's going to be flat rate. We're paying, above market for these employees, or above what the local market bears for, wages and stuff. And in the end, well, that, customers might look at that and go, well, that's really good. But the employee's looking at that, like you said, and say, well, you told me it was going to be $40 to $50 an hour. Now I'm getting 30. I'm actually taking a pretty, a third pay cut here,
Yeah.
instead of in making what I was expecting to make. So that's really where it gets hard, and you have to figure out your strategy going into this, with the concept, with everything else. And this is not just restaurant, but any business. You really have to figure out
Yeah.
what you're going to do ahead of time, and you kind of have to stick to that direction for a while. And if you told the employees one thing and now you're telling them another, don't be surprised if they push back. And that's kind of
Right.
what we're seeing here is I believe they're looking at it going, well, it's kind of a little bit of a bait and switch. You said I'm going to get all this stuff, and now I'm not. And as you know, is true with humans in general, is what have you done for me lately? So forget about the fact that you paid me for the last 2 years. And really all I had to do was volunteer work, or, help out on occasion, but I basically got full-time wages for that and benefits and everything. Now I'm looking at going forward and saying, well, now I want more. And that's going to be the hardest issue for them to overcome, is they got to build that trust. Of course, they're getting a lot of local media. They're getting some national media attention, obviously, by spending $40
Yeah.
million on a restaurant. Even Today's Show will call you up and say, what the hell are you doing? But, it's really coming down to, they do have to kind of dial in what their strategy is, and especially now that they've made the investment they did. So as we kind of wrap this up, Rich, one of the things I want to kind of implement in this and future shows is kind of wrapping up with our take. So if you could just take a few minutes to kind of give your breakdown of this, and what you think Trey and Matt should do, should they be listening on our podcast, which I'm sure they are, because we are such the experts in what we do.
Yeah, I think that, the big key points that we just kind of hit on is, even if it's a labor of love project and just something you just want to throw money into, if it's going to be something that's this big, strategy is key. And I think that strategy that they have of the flat front fee and, taking the tipping out, I think that should have been baked into their initial strategy, and not, changed after you caused people to either stick around for an initial promise, or quit another job to come and be ready for this opening when it happens. And then be transparent about the fact that you plan on it being a soft long-term soft opening, because this thing's been going on now for months,
Mm-hmm.
as to when they said they were going to be ready to open, and when it's actually opening, and it's opening at like a third or even an eighth of what they originally said it was going to be. So that changes everything. So your entire financial picture and projection, if you had investors on this would be a nightmare set of conversations. You wouldn't be on national network. You'd be in a lot of boardrooms. And so I think that the lesson is, if it was anybody other than them, I think that the financial strategy for this really had to be dialed in, and I'm not 100% sure it was. I think it's a little bit of a, let's try it out, let's try this and see if it works. And, as long as it's your money, that's fine. But, it's affecting the employees and they're taking it national. So I think there's more pieces here that, um, as they come out, if hopefully they come out, because I'd love to learn from it. But as we see more and more of what turns out, I think that the financial piece of it really needed to be kind of dialed in a little
Yeah.
bit harder than it was.
Yeah, I agree with you on all that. And this is the lesson that I think a lot of business owners need to take away. Uh, there are things that are good ideas that you can just try out, but you have to look at the expense of what you're doing, and really decide, does the expense make sense for, just winging it, or is strategy involved? And obviously, when you're talking about millions of dollars being spent, I still have seen business owners just kind of wing it on that stuff. And I sit there and scratch my head, and
Yeah.
they might have a vision of what they want, but have they communicated that vision to everyone else? And as you pointed out, it goes back to that communication. You really have to have the strategy figured out. It's not that you can't adjust the strategy. You need to be nimble, because if something's not working, you got to be able to pivot
Right.
and adjust quickly. Uh, but if you don't have at least that initial vision and roadmap laid out, it's going to be very hard to do that. Then you need to make sure that your employees are on board with everything. It probably wouldn't have hurt, even if they had this idea of moving to a flat $30 an hour, asking their employees what they think of it. What were they making when they were getting tips? If they were consistently making $40 to $50 an hour, they would easily say, yeah, this isn't what I want, because I can make more money with the tips. Can we leave it that way? Or are you willing to adjust your prices and your wages to reflect what was promised initially? And that would have been a much more collective approach, I guess, to talking with your staff and keeping them engaged. And that's really what more employees need, or employers need to do with their employees. Is, we're dealing with a labor shortage here, and that labor shortage isn't going away anytime soon. In fact, I'm predicting it's going to be a decade or two before we might catch up. And in some ways, you're going to catch up through automation. So in some of these situations where, employees doing a job, it might be software, it might be hardware, it might be something else, or it might be just streamlining and taking away that service altogether. And that's what companies really need to start looking at, because there's not going to be large groups of people pounding on your door in most cases. That said, you still have to create the best culture possible to attract the best talent possible. So keeping staff happy, keeping them engaged, keeping them autonomous in the work that they do, and empowering them is going to help attract newer people into your company. Now, I don't know how many people are breaking down the doors at restaurants, but again, if you're making good tips, uh, I know a lot of people that would love to work in the restaurant industry because they make good money doing it if you're good at your job. So there's a lot of things here that we can take away. Personally, my opinion is the employees probably walked it a little bit too far here. They could have stepped it back. They didn't need to make as big of a deal about it, and they should be somewhat appreciative of what they've already received. At the same point, I would talk to the owners and say, hey, this isn't how best to do things. Maybe there's a different approach to take here that will keep people happy and still kind of provide you with that vision you want to see. Now, Rich, if you ever get out to Denver and Casa Bonita is open, I would strongly recommend that you get a reservation if they're still available, or walk in and check it out, because it's a spectacle, if
It's on my
nothing
list.
else. Well, good. Well,
It's on my list.
excellent. Well, we're going to wrap up this episode. If you have any questions, you can reach out to either myself, Dan Paulson. Go to Dan Paulson Let's Go. There, you can click on a button there and contact me. Rich, how do they get a hold of you?
It's rveltry at veltrygroup.com. Best way to reach me.
All right. And if you want to catch more episodes like this, we have a podcast, Books in the Biz. We are on YouTube. We are also streaming on some of your favorite social media accounts, Facebook and LinkedIn. You can probably catch us on Twitter too if you're looking really hard. But that's going to be it for our episode today. Please like, subscribe, hit the notifications button so you get the next episode when it's coming up. And thank you again for joining us for Books in the Biz.